I can't wait to get into this one. We talked about this kind of stuff so many times before. The government is running out of money. It's going to shut down possibly on October 1st. So you got a couple of weeks before then. So let me get into this. There's so many things I want to talk about in this article. It's from NerdWallet. Another impasse. Will the government shut down on October 1st? If that happens, they say that the government, the federal agencies, must suspend all non-essential services. The U.S. faces government shutdown on October 1st if Congress does not enact a new spending package or a stopgap. A shutdown could disrupt many federal government operations, which would have impacts on federal workers, the U.S. economy, and everyday Americans. That's us. There's little time left for Congress to act to avert a shutdown. A shutdown is different than a default, the scenario the U.S. narrowly avoided just months ago. And what's the one thing I always tell you every time that this comes up again? Every time, and I'll tell you next time and the time after, they're not fixing the problem. They're not fixing the problem. That's why the problem is still there. They're going to do a stopgap. Yeah, they're going to raise the debt ceiling. Yeah, they're going to get the government funded again. We know. And they're going to do that because they're going to say, look how bad it'll be if we don't do this. Even though the time to fix this is by fixing the root problem and doing it years ago. Right now, we're just fumbling around. Congress has 12 appropriation bills to approve in order to fund 12 major federal agencies before the 2024 fiscal year begins on October 1st, 2023. That's when the 2024 fiscal year starts. The debt ceiling deal, known as the Fiscal Responsibility Act, signed in June, included a discretionary spending cap of $1.59 trillion for 2 years. The White House is also asking for $44 billion in additional emergency funding for things like aid to Ukraine, FEMA, which is also running out of money right now, and border security. When the government shuts down, many federal agencies must suspend all non-essential services. Each federal agency must develop its own contingency plan. This will include things like employee furloughs and service reductions. Non-essential services will be suspended, like national parks, the IRS's customer service and federal student aid assistance. And all those student loan bills are still due beginning in October. Any programs that receive mandatory funding will continue operations, which includes essential services like air traffic control, law enforcement, power grid maintenance, and hospital medical care and border protection, according to the Center for a Responsible Federal Budget. Okay, now listen to this part. I talk about a lot of this stuff, and this is how it's manifesting, how it's playing out now. Maybe you didn't understand what I was talking about before, but here's it becoming real. Other mandatory spending will continue, but service may be reduced, including Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Food and environmental inspections through the Food and Drug Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency would likely be halted or reduced. Let that sink in for a minute. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the National Institutes of Health, could also see reduced operations, not ideal during an illness surge, which we're having right now. There have been 21 government shutdowns since 1976. The most recent government shutdown was also the longest yet, beginning on December 22, 2018, and lasting until January 25, 2019. A total of 34 days, whereas most shutdowns don't last more than a week. We're just blowing through money here. When they shut down the government, there's a cost. It costs a lot of money. The 2018 to 2019 partial shutdown cost $18 billion in federal discretionary spending and reduced gross domestic product by $11 billion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. The government almost ran out of money this year. The U.S. hit its debt ceiling in January and narrowly avoided a default in June that would have triggered a financial crisis. Do you remember that was the extraordinary measures time where it was Janet Yellen actually who was talking about extraordinary measures? And then they blew through all of that, and now they're back to where they started because they still haven't fixed the actual problem. Here's a hint: fiscal responsibility, which enriches all of us, makes all of us in a better financial situation. You don't overspend. There's so much waste. There's so many efficiencies that can be brought to bear that'll make your life better, make you have less tax, have the government be in a fiscally stronger position. So many technologies now we could use that will cut down on spending in a massive way. Whether you're talking about lie detector tests or some of the medical advancements we're enjoying now. On May 1st, the Treasury Department made further measures to fund the government until the X date. which would be June 1st, that passed, when it was projected to run out of money. Defaulting would have been very bad at best and catastrophic at worst. Well said. The U.S. has defaulted only once, and it was due to a technical glitch in 1979. That is absolutely not true. It's defaulted a lot more times than that. But it's also come close before. In 2011, negotiations dragged on so long that the S&P downgraded the U.S. credit rating, which contributed to volatility in the markets. A default that lasts longer than a few days could have resulted in a financial crisis that reverberates around the world. It could have included a sell-off of U.S. debt, money market funds selling out, suspension of federal benefits, increased interest rates on lending products and mortgages. Think about that in terms of with the situation we're in right now with really high interest rates. It would push them even further, potentially. It could also mean tanking stock markets, delayed tax refunds, and the GDP plummeting. A default could have also caused already high interest rates to go even higher, tightening credit requirements and accelerating the arrival of a recession. There are so many forces pushing us towards a recession that I hope we don't get one. I believe we're going to get a serious recession, and everything I'm looking at just keeps solidifying my view on that. But here's the best part, and I laugh all the time. This is like watching Seinfeld or something. It's really enjoyable to hear them talking about this particular thing. How do you solve a problem like the debt ceiling? One of the ideas is minting the $1 trillion coin. A once fringe, now mainstream strategy to bypass the debt limit by having the Treasury mint a $1 trillion platinum coin and deposit it into the Federal Reserve. That concept is the point. That concept that they're even talking about that shows you that all of this economic stuff that they're putting in front of you and reacting to and trying to save the world, they're just absolutely making it up. You could say that we're going to have a $1 trillion piece of tree bark. We'll add that to the balance sheet. Now we are not defaulted. You're in the middle of a house that's burning down and you're not accepting that the house is burning down. Or the Treasury could issue consola bonds to meet the debt obligations. These bonds, also called perpetuity bonds, pay out interest and have no maturity date. The lack of a maturity date means these bonds wouldn't count under the debt ceiling. So in other words, their solution would be to issue a bunch of bonds that just pay out forever so that they could get the money now, and technically it doesn't count as debt. Then you got unfunded liabilities. They just divide up this massive debt that's already much too huge for us to ever get out from under. No government, no person, no organization will ever get out from beneath the level of debt that has been foisted upon you. At its peak in early 2022, the Fed held $6.25 trillion in federal debt. By the close of the year, it was around $5.9 trillion. So there you can see the Fed's balance sheet is declining, but there's no difference in how much debt is out there. They just move some things around, they fumbled around, and they're acting like they're fixing this problem for you. And some of the stuff they do is say, okay, we'll just suspend the concept of the debt limit. Just suspend it. We'll go back to it later. And then everyone's like, yay, you avoided this big problem that they were talking about. The problem will be here with us always until we fix the actual root issue. And until they do that, and I don't think that they ever will, we're heading straight towards federal default, another one, or government shutdown. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of services, a lot of their own wealth. The economy itself is more likely then to get into a stronger depression or recession. We spend wildly over our means as a country, but also we're at a time when the reserve currency is actually declining in value, the US dollar, in terms of usage.